All right, this is where we left off, and we're picking right up with battles in California. This is during the Mexican-American War, and this is going to be under President James K. Polk. And what is happening in California is very much a homegrown, almost type militia type rebellion. Fighting in California and New Mexico, pretty easy battles because once again, the Mexican population in what they consider the northern part of their territory, New Mexico, Arizona, California, is very sparsely populated. Santa Fe, one of the oldest cities in the United States, still very sparsely populated. I don't know how much you guys talk about your actual California history other than missions, so we're just going to kind of delve into this. I find California history incredibly fascinating. So we're going to start with the Bear Flag Revolt, and the reason we call this the Bear Flag Revolt or the Bear Revolt is because this is where we get our awesome California flag. So the Bear Flag Revolt is awesome because it starts off June 14th, 1846, starts off with some guys who are stealing some horses. They're a little bit drunk, and they're going to do that. I'm going to take horses away from some Mexican officials who are taking the horses and just on their way up to Fort Sutter. So very, yeehaw, let's just steal some stuff and get drunk. So what they do is they go to General Mariano Vallejo's headquarters in Sonoma. And I don't know if it's here in Southern California, but I know that definitely up in Northern California, you'll see streets named after Vallejo. There's obviously a city named after Vallejo. So a lot of these names actually might start sounding familiar. So this is a picture of General Vallejo. These drunk horse thieves who are American go to his house and they hold him captive. They're going to take him prisoner until he accepts the United States rule. What they do not understand is that General Vallejo is actually in favor of the annexation of California to the United States. So they have really arrested or put under house arrest the wrong guy. Because they storm in and they're like, we think that California should be part of the United States. And General Vallejo's like, yes, I agree with you. Would you like to have some breakfast? And apparently they just had like a conversation. Now, I don't know if all of that is true or not, but that was from a really old textbook from California history that I read. But regardless, they essentially attacked or caused problems with the guy who was totally on their side and supporting them. So well done, guys. Anyways, the Bear Flag Revolt was also this kind of undercover revolt that was promoted by John C. Fremont. This is a picture of him. I have another actual photograph of him in the next slide. And Fremont is kind of this undercover operative. Yet he's not officially working for the United States. He's there to test the temperature of what would happen in California and places like New Mexico and Arizona if the United States were to take over. So he's kind of agitating or advocating for these American rebels and Californios and other people who are Mexican by descent, but like really have no tie to Mexico other than the fact that they happen to live in that territory. He's kind of taking the temperature and kind of pushing them to like help slowly overthrow the the Mexican government in those areas without really having the United States do too much. So kind of like similar to some of the protests, the stay-at-home protests that you're probably seeing right now. It's not like every American feels that way, and it's by a smaller group of people who are just agitating and poking the right buttons of some people. That was John C. Fremont. This is a picture of him. So after the drunken horse thieves convince Vallejo, and I put that in quotation marks, convince Vallejo, who was already on their side, that that California should be part of the United States, they come up with a super awesome bear flag. And once again, Fremont is not allowed to let them put up the United States flag. So these horse thieves were like, well, we'll put up our own flag. I'm assuming they're going to talk something like that. Maybe they talk with a British accent. Who knows? So this is why you get the sweet, sweet bear flag, California flag, which actually is really cool. This is the initial one on the right. This is an actual picture of it. And kudos to the drunken horse thieves for being able to create something like that. So the idea is that a bear, you can read along with me, a bear stands his ground always, and as long as the stars shine, we stand for the cause. So it's not just a picture of like, hey, we have bears around here, and I like the sky with stars. There was actually a meaning behind it. And so who knew that these guys were so deep? And so this actual bear flag hung up in Sonoma, was raised in Sonoma for over a month until the United States decided, okay, we'll actually take part in this rebellion because we know we're going to be successful. The men claim to be representatives of the California Republic, not representatives of the United States. That is a key. They are not acting on the behest of the United States government. They are acting on the behest of themselves. So there's where you have our bear flag today. I'm sorry that the bear looks a little off, a little wonky. Also, you might notice the color schemes on this. I decided that I was going to be super patriotic, and when I did the Irish section, I kind of did the Irish colors. So not as cool as I thought it would be, but we're going to stick with it. So what's going to happen is that capture of Monterey. This is up like Monterey Bay, Monterey Aquarium up north. This is what you're thinking of. You have a guy named Sloat, street named after him in San Francisco, street named Polk in San Francisco. Anyways, you have a guy named Sloat, Commodore John Sloat. That means he's Navy. Anytime you see the word Commodore, think Navy, all right? Generals are going to be more of your Army, and Commodore you're going to see with the Navy. So in July, a month after the Bear Flag Revolt, essentially, Commodore John Sloat is given direct orders by John Polk to go in and take over Monterey. Really what he does is that this is the United States is now sanctioning the independence and trying to annex California for its own. And this is essentially saying the United States is taking over this fight in this territory. So Sloat comes into Monterey Bay. And he essentially rows, and I'm not kidding you, he rows into Monterey Bay and says, "Do you surrender?" And they're like, yeah, because we don't even have cannonballs to put into our cannons. So yes, the town is yours, sir. So that's exactly how it's going to go down. So most of the fighting, any fighting in California happens in Southern California where there's a higher population. Most people in Northern California are like, yeah, there's like 6 of us, so you guys can have it. Can we still like raise cattle? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, okay, great. We'll be part of the United States. So Sloat is going to be appointed the military governor for a month, and then he's going to be replaced by a man named Commodore Robert Stockton. There's a city named Stockton. There's streets named Stockton. I bring this up just because like so much is named after these guys that we don't talk about since we don't really focus on the Mexican-American War in history. It's just interesting how much of our everyday you probably actually do see based on the Mexican-American War that you don't realize. Like Pico and all these people that we're going to talk about, that's Mexican-American War time. So anyways, Sloat hands over the position to Commodore Robert Stockton. So Robert Stockton is now in charge of all the fighting that's going to happen in California. So this is actually a picture of Kearny. I don't know if you guys seen that name, but he also has streets and stuff named after him. On the left, this is going to be a picture of Kearny. This is actually supposed to be in Santa Fe. But in California, the California campaign, there is little resistance. People aren't really going to fight. Most townspeople are like, okay, you want me to pledge allegiance to the United States? And they're like, yes, we would like you to do that. And they're like, okay, we will pledge. So it's really not, like I said, they're not really fighting back because they're like, as long as they can continue to have the life that they had, or maybe even have more, a better life, then they're willing to accept it. Mexico really didn't have a strong foothold in this territory, which leaves it open for the United States to come in and take. This is what I tell you guys time and time again. If you own 400 acres but don't do anything on it and there's nothing there, how are you going to keep people off of it? How are you going to keep people from squatting on your land? So Stockton is going to march throughout California. He is going to reach Los Angeles, in August of 1846. He marches into LA, raises a flag, and the U.S. controls Los Angeles. He puts a man named Archibald Gillespie in charge of LA with 50 men, and then he leaves. Well, LA is like, oh, that's cool. You guys got to come in and march with your army and take us over. That's great. Raise your flag. And then when he leaves only 50 men, that's where the problems happen. The problem happens when Archibald Gillespie is actually mistreating the Angelenos, the people that are there. He's just being think of every old Western movie that you've ever seen where there's just like a big jerk who's like kicking people and throwing water on people and expecting them to do their bidding while just spitting tobacco at them. That's kind of Archibald Gillespie's vibe. All right, so Gillespie is going to be mistreating people. And then unfortunately, because he's mistreating people, the Angelenos are like, forget this guy. We're going to take back. There's only 50 men in that fort. We're going to take our city back because we don't like this guy. So they're going to trap all of Gillespie and his men in the fort without food and water. That's going to be a problem. And remember, at this point, Commodore Stockton has already marched back up north, assuming that Gillespie could handle this job. Gillespie, not up for the challenge. So this next story is California's Paul Revere. So you guys know Paul Revere on the Midnight Ride, even though he didn't make it all the way to Lexington and Concord. Anyways, California has an even cooler Paul Revere. His name is John Brown, a.k.a. Juan Flaco, a.k.a. Lean John. So I'm assuming he was skinny. Is sent on a daring midnight ride. So Gillespie and his 50 U.S. soldiers are holed up in this fort. Angelenos are basically laying siege to the fort. And so they have to go and send for reinforcements and help. So John Brown, or Juan Flacco, or Lean John, choose your name, he's going to ride 630 miles from Los Angeles to San Francisco in 4.5 days. Apparently, his horse is going to be shot out from under him, and he's going to carry his saddle for 20 miles until he finds another horse. Now, why would he carry a saddle? Because saddles are incredibly expensive at this time. It would be like you leaving your car. Or something incredibly valuable to you. So you're like, oh yeah, you'd be like, why would I carry my saddle through like the desert? Like I'm just imagining driving up the 5, carrying a saddle for 20 miles. It's not going to be fun, but it's incredibly expensive and valuable to them. The other thing about him is apparently he has the orders rolled up in cigarette paper and stashed in his long hair. So I'm kind of feeling like more of a dreadlock situation where he's like maybe or some kind of I don't know how he's going to get his hair, and maybe it's really curly. Who knows? I haven't really seen pictures of Juan Flacco, but the idea is that it wasn't unheard of for spies or people like that to hide their orders or intel within their hair. Like you hear about spies putting it in their shoes and whatnot, but also putting it, women would often put it in their curls and hair bows and things like that because it wouldn't be checked. So he carries these orders to let Stockton know, this is real, we need your help. In the meantime, Angelenos are going to basically kick Gillespie and his men out of Los Angeles, and Commodore Stockton is going to have to turn around and come back with 300 men, and thus the Battle of the Old Woman's Gun ensues. Love the name of it because literally it's about a woman, like I mentioned in the last lecture, a woman who held onto a cannon that she put in her shed, and that the Mexicans or the Angelenos will actually use. So you have Jose Antonio Carrillo. He's going to lead the Mexicans. They're able to push the United States troops back to the boats because remember, Commodore Stockton, Navy. So he's going to bring a lot of his troops via water, via the ocean, and then they're going to come off using an amphibious attack. They're going to use an old antique gun that was actually hidden by this woman, and this will be a victory for Mexico and the Angelenos because they are actually able to push the United States and Commodore Stockton back to their boats. The other miscommunication allows for another Mexican victory, and this is when Captain Stephen Kearny, who's going to be coming in from New Mexico, he's informed that California is totally under U.S. control, so no need to hurry. So Captain Kearny only takes part of his army with him to California. He leaves the rest of his army in the New Mexico territory to kind of maintain order maintain order and control. So he doesn't bring his full army with him and leaves the other half back in Santa Fe. So then you're going to have the Battle of San Pascual, which is going to be just north of San Diego. This is going to happen in December 5th, 1846, and Kearny and his 200 troops are going to run into 150 armed Californians led by Andres Pico. Pico Boulevard, if you guys are familiar with that. All right. So what's going to happen? This is the largest armed conflict in California, is the Battle of San Pascual. Californians are going to be fighting with muskets and long willow-shaped lances. The U.S. troops can't fire their arms because it never rains in Southern California except during the Battle of San Pascual. So what happens is you can't use your gunpowder if it's wet. So the Californians are actually using muskets, but they're also using like these basically spears, these lances made of trees that you can still use and kill people with, whether it's wet or dry. So 22 Americans are going to be killed, and little damage is done to the Californians because what are you going to do if you can't fire a gun at them? So some people argue that it was more of a draw here, I would probably lean towards it was more of a Mexican victory. So I say the Battle of Old Woman's Gun and the Battle of San Pascual are Mexican victories. This is just an example of the spears that they were using. It's very like vaqueros, and then you can see the guys in blue who are trying to fire. Even though it looks like a beautiful day, apparently it was raining. The Battle of La Mesa, this is the last battle fought in California. I'm not really going to go into this, but this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to lead to the Cahuenga capitulation, which basically means they're giving up. January 13th, 1847, Andres Pico surrenders to Fremont and signs a treaty. Then it's going to lead to a couple battles in Mexico, and we're done with the Mexican-American War. So you have this one, and I'll have one more lecture, and that'll be done. And then we'll start heading into the American Civil War. But hopefully you learned a little bit about California. I have so much more I could tell you, but I know these videos probably get a little bit long, so enjoy.